routine walk home from a shopping mall ends in murder.
It's a horrendous crime, to say the least.
It was a sexually motivated crime, but there were no fluids or samples identified as being a DNA profile.
All signs point to someone who has struck before and will strike again.
Something made him angry, and the crime is an expression of anger.
Police construct a portrait of the killer, but which suspect does it match?
This individual is beginning to look very good to us.
It was apparent that he was lying to police.
Time and again, the case collapses.
They were devastated. They were angry.
It will take dogged investigation and a lucky break to end the hunt for a monster.
This guy did the thing. It was just horrific.
Year-old Sarah Whitehead has just returned home from her first business trip.
They asked her to help open a new store, so that was her first day driving a car on the highway by herself, so she's pretty excited about that.
Oh!
Although still a university student, her summer job with a retail chain is blossoming into a career.
And she just said that her trip went well and she was going to go to the mall, and I said, okay, I'll see you after.
But by 11 p.m., Sarah still hasn't come home.
I thought maybe she went up the street. Her best friend lives at the other end of the street. So we made a phone call, and she hadn't seen her either. And we phoned a couple other friends of hers, and nobody had seen her. So that's when I knew anyway that something was wrong for sure.
Brian Whitehead calls police to report his missing daughter.
Where she is. We knew which route she would take coming home, so we kind of walked to the mall.
The Northgate Mall is 20 minutes by foot from the Whiteheads' house, through woodland that borders their neighborhood. Sarah's route of choice there and back was one of the many pathways through this tree-lined area, all of which run from the mall's rear parking lot.
There's no indication of exactly which direction Sarah went in, other than we assume she would have taken the most direct route home. They were checking local areas to see if Sarah would turn up, and she never did.
Because it was so late at night, we decided to wait until the daylight and pick it up the next day.
Family and friends of the Whiteheads spend a sleepless night waiting for Sarah to return. At dawn, Brian's brother Eric offers to resume the search.
He came over and he asked me if I wanted to go with him and have a look around, and I did, and I didn't want to go, just in case that either we don't find her or we do find her. So I said, I don't think so. No.
Sarah's uncle proceeded to the area behind the mall.
Eric Whitehead knows a shortcut Sarah sometimes uses.
Sarah! Sarah!
He noticed the Walkman laying just off the path. So he continued down that path, not very far, maybe 50 feet.
And there he finds what he fears most.
He discovered Sarah's lifeless body. He immediately left the area and went to a neighbor, then called police.
Detective Tim Nesbitt of the North Bay Police is put in charge of the investigation.
What When I arrived at the scene, walked up the gravel road towards the location of Sarah's body, I met with our forensic identification officer who was setting up his inner perimeter.
Martin Ransom is the force's lead forensic investigator.
It was an incident which we don't expect to happen within our city. It would be the only one in time that I can remember where a young female was attacked and murdered.
In this case, because it was a greenbelt and there was access trails coming from residential areas and the mall, there was quite a large area that was cordoned off.
Authorities assess the disturbing crime scene.
She was nude from the waist down. There were a pair of women's panties laying next to the body. And she was missing a pair of shorts. It was fairly evident that it wasn't a robbery at that point. The wallet with the deceased had money in it. She was wearing jewelry. It was more than likely a sexually motivated crime.
Bruising around her neck suggests the victim was strangled.
There were also some areas on her ankles and wrists that appeared to be bruising.
You could see where the grass had been knocked down. You could see where a struggle had taken place.
It wasn't simply a body that was dumped in that location.
But to Officer Ransom, it seems an unlikely place for an attack.
There did not appear to be any real cover for anyone that would have committed that crime in that location. If they were standing up, they could readily be seen from the roadway. To me, that seemed sort of odd that someone would actually choose an area like that to commit this crime.
Sarah Whitehead's killer is not only vicious, he's brazen. Police need to find him, and fast.
It's a horrendous crime, to say the least, and the community will be demanding answers very, very quickly.
20-year-old Sarah Whitehead has been brutally murdered near a shopping mall in North Bay, Ontario.
For us to have any serious crimes such as murder, especially a murder of a young woman, that really hits the community at the core.
Evidence at the scene suggests how the crime might have unfolded.
The Walkman was found on a fairly well-traveled path. My theory is that Sarah was walking with her Walkman on. I believe that she passed on hidden in the first pathway that went off from the main area. As she passed, someone went out and grabbed her.
Sarah's many bruises indicate a fierce struggle.
I believe at some point she escaped from him, that she ran back towards the roadway through the grassed area, where at that point he probably gained control of her in the same location that her body was found.
Detective Nesbitt now faces the grim task of informing the victim's family, something Brian Whitehead's own brother could not bring himself to do.
As soon as the police were coming, you could tell by the look in their face. No. You don't believe it, of course. Or myself, anyway. You kind of go into shock.
Detectives learn more about the couple's beloved daughter.
Sarah Whitehead was a 20-year-old university student. She was in the business administration program. She was an honor student. She was well-liked among her friends. Sarah was about 5'6" and weighed about 130 pounds, and you would consider that she was in fairly good shape. Sarah liked to walk a lot and would walk to the beat of music, wearing her headphones and her Walkman.
Included in Sarah's extensive social circle was her boyfriend of 2 years, Tyler.
Her friend base really relied on her. She was like the go-to girl for her friends.
Around. In.
She thought things through pretty good. Pretty good kid. That's...
cold-blooded killing sets the small city on edge.
People were nervous. First of all, you had this young girl who's loved by so many people.
Thank you.
And then you had the police who were clearly bothered by this murder. People just talked about that fear, that uneasiness, that there's a stranger amongst them who can, you know, take away a life so brutally as what happened to Sarah Whitehead. And I think, in a way, everybody felt victimized.
As the family mourns, the investigation intensifies. Officers comb the crime scene for the victim's missing shorts, while Detective Nesbitt retraces Sarah's last steps.
The last 24 hours of Sarah's life and whoever had dealings with her were of prime importance to us. So we wanted to speak to her boyfriend.
Police learn Tyler has a job at the same mall where Sarah was last seen.
He was working in a large retail store which had video cameras, and at the time of the murder, we were able to see him in the store working with other employees. So we were able to eliminate her boyfriend quite quickly.
Surveillance footage from the mall also shows Sarah exiting before 8 p.m.
We actually spoke to an individual who describes Sarah walking across the parking lot. And the description that she gives us matches Sarah.
Authorities enlist the public's help in tracking down a killer.
We had telephone lines set up, and the calls did start coming in. It's important to let the public know that the police are responding to this and they're taking care of business.
A post-mortem confirms the victim was anally raped after being strangled.
We could see some marks on the side of the deceased's neck that the pathologist identified as possibly being finger marks from strangulation.
Then, a surprising setback.
As a result of the actual examination, there were no fluids or samples identified as being DNA profile.
The attacker left none of his blood or semen on Sarah's body, depriving police of his genetic fingerprint and posing serious challenges for the investigation. Two days in, with no progress, North Bay authorities recruit Jim Van Allen, a profiler with the Provincial Violent Crimes Unit.
We can prepare what we call unknown offender profiles and describe the identity of the person that would likely have committed a crime like this. And we try and take information that comes from the behavioral sciences, psychology, psychiatry, criminology, and we try and turn that into operational strategies that police investigators can use.
Van Allen paints a picture of a psychopath, lying in wait, eager to inflict violence.
He knew that walkway was there. He knew that people would be walking up and down that way there. He knew that there would be opportunistic victims that would present themselves. This suggested some type of familiarity with the area, and it was my opinion that at least on the day of the crime, the offender was living in North Bay. The victim's treatment from the initial violence through the sexual assault and completing with the murder suggested a very brutal lack of empathy. So it was far more likely that he would be a total stranger to her.
My profile says he's a male, young, strong.
Something made him angry. Typically, this is in the range of a conflict with somebody, but there's some recent loss that has made this individual angry, and the crime is a expression of that anger.
Police suspect the killer took the victim's walking shorts as a trophy, but Van Allen disagrees.
If they take an item of clothing, it's probably an intimate garment that touches the intimate areas of the victim's body. I didn't see the walking shorts as being part of that.
Instead, he believes the shorts are still at the crime scene and suggests expanding the search. His hunch pays off.
Those shorts were located underneath a rock, which was outside of the actual interior perimeter.
The shorts were an extremely important find.
The killer knew how to conceal evidence. He took it with him to clean himself off, and then he concealed it by folding it and putting it under a rock.
It was evident that there was some staining in the shorts, as well as pubic hair.
The evidence is sent to the Centre of Forensic Sciences in Toronto, where the stain is identified as semen. The killer left his DNA after all. While this evidence is analysed, detectives sort through the dozens of tips being phoned in from across the city. One in particular grabs their attention.
We received a phone call that some articles of clothing are located alongside of Highway 1117. Not far from the murder scene. And a forensic officer was dispatched immediately to this area and was able to photograph and seize this clothing.
In the pocket of the shirt are traces of tobacco.
And we could see on the jeans there was grass stains, as if somebody had been rolling around in the grass doing something.
There was a paisley shirt. It was a multicolored long sleeve shirt. Again, just looking at how hot it was, that we found that was very unusual, that someone would actually be wearing a long sleeve shirt in the heat of the summer, but that's what we found outside the area of the farmer's market.
So we had them analyzed.
Another tip comes from a truck driver who tells police he picked up a suspicious hitchhiker on the night of the murder.
He could smell strong odor of alcohol on him, cigarette smell. The hitchhiker talks about working out west and making $18 an hour on the pipeline.
But the driver knows this wage is far too low.
Kind of twigged on him, like, this doesn't make any sense. You don't work on a pipeline for $18 an hour. He found it unusual.
Finally, there's a major breakthrough. Another witness tells of her next-door neighbor's strange behavior on the night of the murder.
An individual was seen placing something in a garbage can at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, which is in the neighborhood where Sarah's body was found.
The man's name is Richard Lehman. He's been on police radar ever since the victim was discovered.
He had approached the crime scene more than once, inquiring about what was going on and when the crime scene was going to become open again.
At the time, detectives found his level of interest excessive. Now, they look closer and discover he's got a record of petty offenses.
He has been involved with the police before, and he is known to one of our officers. This individual jumps out at us as being somebody we need to focus our attention on.
Less than a week after Sarah Whitehead's murder, North Bay police may have identified her killer. Investigators bring murder suspect Richard Lehman in for questioning.
You seem a little nervous.
Incredibly, he admits to being at the crime scene the night Sarah was killed.
He would walk his dog in that area, and he describes to us being in the area when the crime took place.
But Lehman insists he had nothing to do with Sarah's death. Police are not convinced.
He was seen in the bush area close to where the shorts were initially found. This suggested a possibility that he might have been moving into the area to move them and destroy evidence.
Lehman digs himself in deeper when he refuses to provide a DNA sample.
I'm not doing that.
To get one, police take the unusual step of setting up a sting operation.
We decide to enlist the services of an undercover police officer. We got him a job at a location where the suspect worked.
The undercover cop befriends Lehman, who continues to incriminate himself.
He was behaving in manners that we sometimes associate to deceptive people.
A discarded cigarette butt is all investigators need to profile his DNA.
Now we had to wait for our DNA analysis to come back to tell us whether we're headed down the right path or not.
While they wait for lab results, another trap is laid for the prime suspect.
We collected a pair of shorts that was similar color to Sarah's, and we brought it back to the scene and placed it in the same location.
We interview our suspect again, and he still refuses to provide a consensual sample at this time. So we basically tell him we're at the end of the road with our crime scene, we're pulling down the ribbons, and we're done.
It's a critical moment. Detectives wait for Lehman's next move. Now that he's convinced he's in the clear, he doesn't disappoint.
No sooner than us dropping suspect off, he attended the murder scene.
As Lehman makes a beeline for the hidden evidence, police secretly record his every move.
We had some officers in the wooded area, camouflaged and hidden.
But then, only inches from the hiding place, trouble.
Unfortunately, he sees a police officer who's camoed and hiding.
Lehman flees, but the fact he returns so quickly and appeared to be searching for the walking shorts tells police they found their man. When confronted, Lehman claims he was only trying to assist the investigation. Police don't believe it.
And he quickly realizes that we're discussing the possibility that he's responsible for committing this murder. So he begins to give us very weak denials. He's saying things like, I wouldn't do anything like that. I'm not like that.
And he was providing inconsistent stories that were not later confirmed by additional investigation. All this had the effect of raising suspicion.
Detectives are close to charging Lehman with the crime, only needing DNA linking him to the semen found on the victim's shorts. But when the lab results come in, Tim Nesbitt is stunned.
His DNA did not match the DNA evidence at the crime scene.
Lehman is cleared, guilty only of eccentric behavior. The case has hit a major stumbling block.
When the first suspect fell through, that was a huge drop on our roller coaster ride in this investigation.
Nesbitt must now share the news with the Whitehead family.
They were aware that we had developed a very good suspect, and getting a resolution to this quickly is vital for the family. And that didn't happen.
Oh, it was huge disbelief.
I could see the disappointment in the Whiteheads, as we all were disappointed.
Now 2 weeks into the investigation, police still have no idea who killed Sarah Whitehead. Then finally, good news from the forensics lab. Tests show the abandoned clothing found near the mall belongs to Sarah's attacker.
The DNA profile from the semen on the shorts was the same as the DNA profile from the semen on the jeans. So we had a DNA profile of the perpetrator of the murder.
Perhaps fearing he'd been seen, the killer changed his clothes.
Whether or not someone would actually recognize him as being unusual or being in a location he shouldn't have been, I do believe that he felt that he had been recognized.
In the hope someone will identify a suspect, police display the clothes in the mall.
When they do that, it tells you these guys are getting desperate. You know, they haven't got anything going, and they need something. And that's when they start releasing more to try and get the information.
But the desperate measure pays off. 2 teenage girls come forward with a story of being harassed by someone wearing a similar outfit. Mall security is familiar with the suspect, a man named Gordon Gibbs.
We had a number of complaints about him exhibiting stalking behavior. This individual attended the mall frequently.
A background check reveals Gibbs has a history of harassing women. And he's mentally unstable.
So basically at this point, because we're aware of the stature of the individual, he matches the clothing, we've got all this other information about his conduct, so I went down to his motel room.
Gibbs has been living in a motel since the time of the murder.
He's very difficult to talk to. He continually referred to the Almighty Gabriel, and it was obvious that he had some issues, but he matched the clothing. He carried his cigarettes in the shirt pocket.
It's a possible link to the tobacco recovered from the killer's shirt.
I'm a prophet.
Nesbitt requests a DNA sample. Gibbs refuses.
No, I want you out of my room. I want you. No, I know. I'm Gabriel, but you can't bear false witness. I want you to leave. You're gonna have to go.
Desperate for more on the new suspect, Nesbitt reviews hours of surveillance footage from the mall. Again, the effort pays off.
We were able to determine that he was actually in the mall on August the 7th. Around 6:30 p.m., he had made a bank transaction. He then went to another area of the mall and became agitated and argumentative with an individual. So we had documentation putting him in the mall on the evening of the murder.
Here she is.
But the tapes also reveal something else. Sarah Whitehead was in the very same store as the angry stalker, just minutes before she was murdered.
Him being at this location at this time of night and his demeanor, those things are starting to mount.
The pieces appear to be coming together. The brutal crime that shattered a family and shocked an entire city could finally be solved. Weeks into the Sarah Whitehead murder investigation, police zero in on their second suspect. To learn more about Gordon Gibbs, detectives interview his former girlfriend, Karen McCall.
You look happy here?
Our profile had indicated that there was a breakup of some sort that was key to ticking this individual off.
McCall reveals she and Gibbs did indeed have a relationship-ending fight just before the murder, prompted by his demand for anal sex.
She wasn't in agreement with him, and this fueled an argument.
Police note the direct link between Gibbs' failed request and the assault suffered by Sarah Whitehead. Suspicion deepens, and McCall tells them Gibbs returned 5 days after the slaying, acting more erratically than ever. She caught him dyeing his hair.
Changing his appearance at that time was somewhat suspect to us.
Even more incriminating, he then took a 350-kilometer trip to Toronto.
I need a cab to 234 Ashcroft, please.
By taxi.
It cost him well in excess of $300 to get out of town in a hurry.
North Bay police put Gibbs under 24-hour surveillance. He plays into their hands when he lands himself in trouble.
This individual ended up getting himself arrested in a store by an off-duty officer. When he discarded a cigarette that he was smoking on the ground, it was retrieved, and that sample was eventually sent down to Center for Forensic Sciences.
The court places Gibbs in a psychiatric hospital for assessment.
His response throughout was that he was not responsible for this crime. He did not do it.
But police already know he frequented the mall, stalking young girls. He was caught on camera in the same store as Sarah Whitehead. He may even have met her there.
Hi.
Gordon.
Excuse me.
He could have followed her outside, behind the mall, to the woodland. With her Walkman on, she was a perfect target.
This individual is obviously beginning to look very good to us. fits the clothing. He's in the mall. He leaves town. He changes his appearance. Everything fits. All you're waiting for is a DNA sample to come back.
The wait is excruciating for both investigators and the Whitehead family, who simply want their daughter's killer brought to justice.
You know, we're kind of running out of hope at that point. And when you're waiting day by day to hear something, it is a long time.
Finally, after 4 long weeks, the results come in.
We get a call from the Center of Forensic Sciences advising us that we have a DNA match.
DNA linked Gibbs to the murder. And when that happened, there was a sense of relief.
4.5 months after the death of Sarah Whitehead, Detective Nesbitt charges Gordon Gibbs with first-degree murder.
Murder of Sarah. What are you doing? I'm not responsible. Get off me! That's bullshit!
We definitely had a positive feeling that it was finally over, because when you're, doesn't matter where I was, you know, you're looking around saying, is that the guy or is this the guy? You don't know.
While Gibbs' arrest is great news for the Whitehead family, it leaves criminal profiler Jim Van Allen dismayed.
I personally felt bad. I felt that I had misdirected the investigation.
His profile of the killer doesn't fit the suspect.
He differed, I thought, significantly from the profile that I had written. In terms of age, he was far older. I believe he was in his 50s. I thought this would be a much younger man. But certainly we cannot argue with forensic evidence. If they have a forensic link of that individual to the crime, that's what needs to be followed.
But 3 months later, there's a shocking turn when the all-important forensic evidence comes into question. Previously, all DNA tests examined 4 locations for DNA comparison.
In 1997-98, we were researching in the laboratory the introduction of a new DNA test that was able to target 9 locations.
The new, more accurate test reveals a devastating truth. Gibbs' DNA does not, in fact, match the killer's.
That was unusual. That was unusual to have that occur.
We were told that our suspect that we had charged with first-degree murder was not the person responsible. How are we going to deal with this?
These are great coppers, and I think there was probably some embarrassment there, unjustified, but at the same time they were devastated. They were angry.
I went to meet with the Whitehead family and broke the news to them.
Couldn't believe it.
They had great difficulty in understanding how the DNA profile could be wrong. When in fact it's not really wrong, it just was not complete.
A lot of sympathy was directed towards the family because, you know, you get this roller, you've already got this horrific murder, and then you get, you know, some sense of relief after the arrest, and then you get this situation where the charges are withdrawn and this fellow is not the suspect, and absolutely not the suspect.
So that was a step back, and the wink started again.
Detective Nesbitt offers to resign from the case.
I felt it appropriate to offer up to the Whiteheads that if they wanted to change an investigator, we could make those arrangements.
Sarah's family decides to keep the faith.
They treated us so good that we basically said, if you don't mind, keep going.
It's probably fortunate that he didn't resign. I mean, Tim Nesbitt, you know, he's a very fine copper, and I've seen over the years many successes of that man.
We've got to, as the investigative team, continue and dig down and carry on.
But after 7 months of investigation and 2 major setbacks, success seems a long way off. It's now a year and a half since the brutal rape and murder of 20-year-old university student Sarah Whitehead. Desperate for a solid suspect, North Bay detectives spend months trying to match the killer's DNA against perpetrators of similar crimes from all over the country. But the mission fails. Investigators face a grim reality. They may never find Sarah's killer.
The person is either deceased or he may be incarcerated somewhere. That police are just not having contact with him, and there's no activity taking place.
Then, from the nearby small town of Sturgeon Falls comes an unlikely lead. Chris Brown is a court officer with the Sturgeon Falls Police.
Yeah, this is Chris. I received a call from a lady from a penitentiary in Saskatchewan, and she called to notify us that they had a Paul Hache in custody, and we had a warrant for his arrest for bicycle theft.
Brown reviews the 2-year-old charge.
Policy or procedure is that they notify us so that we can deal with our warrant while he's in custody. And essentially what happened was Hache stole his sister's bike.
What the hell are you doing? Go inside.
And then he had taken it to a pawn shop and pawned it, and shortly after that disappeared with the money.
The penitentiary clerk informs Brown Hache has been sentenced to 19 years for a crime in Western Canada. The Sturgeon Falls bike theft incident pales in comparison.
Because he received such a substantial penalty, we would just bring our bicycle theft warrant forward to the court and the charges would be withdrawn, and that would be the end of it.
But Brown is curious. He asks what Hache did to warrant such a stiff sentence.
She told me that he was in custody for a violent offense against a female out in Calgary, and what he had done to that female victim was probably the most brutal offense against a female she had ever heard. And when I got off the phone, I started leafing through the Crown Brief and reading the synopsis.
Something in the file catches Brown's attention.
The bicycle theft occurred in August of '97, and I started to research and go through some of the police files from North Bay City Police, knowing in the back of my mind that the Sarah Whitehead murder occurred in and around that time as well. And by coincidence, the bicycle theft occurred, I believe it was about a couple of days before the Sarah Whitehead murder.
Hi, it's Detective Nesbitt. Hello, this is Officer Chris Brown.
Officer Brown called us to give us this tip. We should maybe have a look at this suspect in relation to our crime.
The officer that came up with the information did an admirable job, in my opinion. That was heads-up police work.
Constable Brown took the initiative to look a little deeper into this warrant and the accused and what he was actually serving time for. And the crime was so horrific that he was able to put 2 and 2 together and associate it to our crime. The feeling he must have gotten is that this individual is capable of committing the crime here in North Bay.
Nesbitt researches the Calgary rape case that put Hache behind bars.
That's when 31-year-old Paul Hache forced her off the street and into the storeroom. He then raped and beat her in an assault the judge has since described as horrific and repulsive.
He left the young woman for dead and was apprehended a short distance away when the Calgary police helicopter located him. And officers were able to get to the scene quickly and arrest him.
If this is the same man who raped and murdered Sarah Whitehead, a DNA comparison to crime scene and clothing samples will prove it. But Nesbitt discovers Hache's DNA has never been placed on file.
Paul Hache was charged with aggravated assault, but he pled guilty. So no examination was done of the items that they had seized when he was arrested.
Nesbitt asks the Calgary police to send him any physical evidence from the case.
The cigarette butt was recovered at the crime scene in Calgary. That was still available for testing. It had not been tested.
Meanwhile, police interview Paul Hache's sister. She tells them Hache has long been a troubled, violent man who frequently found himself homeless.
He was living with his sister. She took him in and helped him find some employment.
Nesbitt learns his suspect has always battled the bottle.
Drunk.
Short of cash for booze, he stole his sister's bike and caused a major rift in the family.
Oh, I haven't seen him since because I kicked him out.
After the bike incident, Paul Hashi was no longer welcome at their residence. And he left and he came to North Bay and signed himself into the detoxification center.
His story resonates with Jim Van Allen.
It was my opinion that that stolen bicycle incident led to Hashi's destabilization, his anger, and likely him wanting to pay somebody back for his problems in his life. She reported him. He was on the run.
Hashi's clothing was removed from his sister's residence and left at the bus station in North Bay for him to come and pick up. The clothing included the shirt and the pants that we had located next to the highway.
On the morning of August the 7th, 1997, Hashi went to the bus station to pick up his clothes. The station is directly in front of Northgate Mall. Destitute and homeless, he found all his worldly possessions in a garbage bag. It might have been enough to push him over the edge. When DNA evidence from Calgary arrives, the final piece of the puzzle falls into place.
In comparing the DNA profile from the semen on the shorts and the jeans to the DNA profile from the cigarette butt, the profiles were the same.
Police have their killer. Detective Nesbitt travels to the Saskatchewan prison where Hashi is incarcerated.
We attempted to interview Hashi, and he had no comment. He would not speak to us and actually got up and was ready to leave.
But with overwhelming evidence stacked against him, Hashi has no choice. He's forced to provide a blood sample for DNA testing, a failsafe to eliminate any possible doubt. Not only will it confirm his guilt in the Sarah Whitehead murder, it will also rewrite the case history in a string of unsolved crimes. For nearly 2 years, North Bay, Ontario, has been haunted by the brutal killing of Sarah Whitehead. Now, police finally have the DNA evidence they need to charge Paul Hashi with murder.
The random match probability was 1 in 260 billion. So that calculation provides extremely strong support.
Detective Nesbitt tells Sarah's parents their long wait is finally over.
We found him.
It looked and sounded like this is a guy, he fit everything perfectly. What we didn't know for sure is if he would plead guilty or not and drag it out even longer.
Police interview Hashi for 3 days, revealing a mountain of evidence against him.
We've got
He knows you're hot on his trail. And he quickly realizes that now my goose is cooked. I've got to attempt to deal with this, and how do I best go about it?
After much coaxing, Nesbitt finally gets what he's after.
stuff, you know?
He was comfortable enough with us to decide that he was going to confess to what he has done.
Hashi describes what happened on the day of the murder. Collecting his clothes at the bus station ignited his anger, just as police suspected.
He purchased some alcohol and sat in the wooded area by himself, smoking and drinking most of the afternoon.
By dusk, his anger had turned to violent rage. He had never met Sarah Whitehead. She was simply in the wrong place at the worst time. Hashi then panicked over where to hide Sarah's shorts and the semen evidence they contained.
He takes it a distance off into the wooded area and conceals it under a rock.
He fled the bush and headed to a nearby highway. Fearing he had been spotted, he quickly changed his clothes.
He discarded the clothing and stepped out on the highway and hitchhiked outside of the city.
Incredibly, the trucker who gave police an early tip about a suspicious hitchhiker had come face to face with a murderer.
He called back after Hashi had been arrested and said, "That's the person that I picked up."
Unfortunately, his tip was one of 1,000 untraceable leads. Then, the case takes an even darker turn when Hashi reveals the true depths of his depravity, confessing to a string of violent crimes.
Paul Hashi was evil. What this guy did to people was just horrific.
These were crimes across Canada that we attempted to track down. One crime was a 1994 murder in Toronto, where a male was beaten and left to die.
He's one of very few people that killed both men and women in a sexual context. He committed 2 separate high-violence, brutal sexual assaults against 2 women in Alberta.
One victim was raped while her baby daughter slept nearby. In Vancouver, Hashi staged more assaults. He even attacked a homeless man.
The brutality of this man displayed is mind-numbing.
In all, Paul Hashi confesses to 2 murders, 4 rapes, and more incidents of horrific violence never reported to police. He pleads guilty to all charges and is sentenced to life in prison.
This investigation took an extremely long time, 3 years out of the Whitehead's life, out of all the officers who were involved, but we stuck together and we pushed it through. So this was a roller coaster ride. We were up and down twice, and the third time we stayed up.
People were quite happy that the thing was resolved, and I'm sure the Whitehead family was too. I can't imagine them ever getting over a loss like that.
It's hard to get any true enjoyment out of anything. It never goes away, and it should. Not a day goes by even now they don't think about it.